This will be the Chapter 8 lecture for first year chemistry over chemical reactions, and for this particular chapter we break it up into 3 quizzes. So I'm only going to be lecturing over the first 3 slides because that contains the information for quiz number 1, and then I'll continue to lecture over the rest of the notes in program number 2 and then in part 3. And again, each lecture will contain the information necessary for the 3 quizzes that I give for the Chapter 8 chemical reactions notes. So the first thing we discuss in class is what information is given for a chemical equation, and the 2 major areas that are given are the reactants and products of the reaction and also the coefficients of the balanced chemical equation, which tells us the amount of substances that are involved. So if you look at the example shown on the slide, we have 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule, and it yields 2 water molecules. So we know the reactants, they're on the left side of the arrow, and we know the products are on the right side of the arrow, and for this particular reaction there's only one product, which is water, and the arrow means reacts to produce or yields when you read the equation aloud in the form of a sentence. And from a reaction we can see that it took 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule to form the water, so they react in a 2-to-1 mole ratio. And so the numbers in front represent the number of moles of reactants and products, or you could also convert that to the number of molecules that react. And if the substances are gases, which in our example they are, the coefficients can also represent the amount of liters of a substance. So we're given the reactants and the products, and we're given the amounts of substances either in moles, molecules, or liter ratios. On the next slide, we look at the common symbols that are used in a chemical equation, and these are found in the textbook in Table 8.1. So the first symbol is just a plus sign, and that separates 2 reactants or 2 products from each other. And in our previous example, we had the hydrogen molecules and the oxygen molecules separated with a plus sign. The arrow means yields, we know that. And if you see a double arrow, that means the reaction's at equilibrium, which means that it can go forwards and backwards. So it's sort of a reversible reaction, kind of like recharging a battery. And if you see anything in parentheses with little S, L, G, or an AQ, that tells you what the phase of the matter is. So it's either a solid, liquid, gas, or aqueous. And aqueous means it's dissolved in water. If you see a triangle above the yield sign, that means that the reaction was heated. And if you see a compound or an element above the yield sign, that means that substance above the yield sign acts as a catalyst, which speeds up the reaction. Now if you see an up arrow, that means there is a product that's a gas. And if you see a down arrow, that means the product is a solid. Another name for a solid product is sometimes called a precipitate. Now on the next slide we do some practice problems, taking a chemical equation and writing a sentence that describes it. And then in letter C we're going to take a sentence and we're going to decipher the words and write the symbols for the chemical equation. So we go from the chemical symbols to a sentence, or from a sentence to the chemical symbols. So the first thing that we need to do is just read the reaction from left to right, identifying what all the substances are. So we have a solid substance to begin with, and that substance is sodium hydrogen carbonate, which is sometimes called sodium bicarbonate, and it's commonly known as baking soda. And you can find the name sodium on the ion sheet that I give the students, and the HCO3 ion is called bicarbonate or hydrogen carbonate, and again it's on the ion sheet. Now the next symbol that we see is the plus sign, so we just write the word plus because we're just going to write a sentence describing this reaction. So we have solid sodium bicarbonate plus HCl, which is AQ. AQ means aqueous, and HCl is one of the common acids we use all the time in the laboratory. It's called hydrochloric acid. And then we have the yield sign, so we put down the word yields. And what is this reaction making? Well, it makes another aqueous substance, which is NaCl, which is commonly known as table salt, but the fancy name is sodium chloride. And again, the name of the ion Na is on the ion sheet, and the name for Cl, chloride, is on the ion sheet. Then we have plus, and we're just making water. Now you don't have to say liquid water, because when you say water we assume it's a liquid. If for some reason it was a vapor, you would see a little G behind the H2O symbol, and we would say water vapor as opposed to water just as a liquid. And then we have plus one more compound, which is CO2. That's commonly known as carbon dioxide gas. And of course the arrow going up tells us it's gas. Now in the next example we have H2SO4 and it's also AQ, so we say it's aqueous, and then this substance is an acid and it's a common acid that we use a lot in class. This is sulfuric acid. It's found in car batteries if you're interested in knowing that. And then we have another reactant, so we say plus the next aqueous substance. And this next aqueous substance is BaCl2. Ba stands for the barium ion and Cl stands for the chloride ion, so the compound is barium chloride. And then we say that it yields or reacts to produce HCl. We know that's aqueous hydrochloric acid. We had that in the previous example. And the other product is BaSO4 as a solid. So we can say that it's solid barium, which is the Ba part, and SO4 is sulfate. So it's barium sulfate. And the name of each of those ions is again on the ion sheet that the students can look up. Now the last example, we're going to take the description and write a chemical equation. So we have sodium plus bromine when heated reacts to produce solid sodium bromide. So the first substance we write down is sodium. Sodium symbol is Na. Now if you look on the periodic table, sodium is color-coded black, which means that it's a solid at room temperature, so we need to put a little S behind it. Now the first thing that popped up on the overhead was the yield sign, and I suggest that the students write that down first, and then we just need to decide if the substances that are described are reactants or products. And it says sodium plus bromine when heated reacts to produce. So sodium and bromine are the reactants, and then the product is going to be the sodium bromide. So I put the yield sign down first for the students just so they can decide which side to put the reactants and products on. So anyway, we have the solid sodium and it's reacting with bromine, so we put the little plus sign to separate the reactants from each other. And bromine is a diatomic element, so the symbol is actually Br2. It's one of the Hunkelbriefs. And bromine is going to be a liquid at room temperature because it's color-coded blue on our periodic table in the classroom. So we put a little L in parentheses behind it. And that's going to produce a solid, which is sodium bromide. Now sodium has a +1 charge on the ion sheet, and bromine has a -1 charge. The bromide ion is -1. So we only have to worry about the charges being crossed if they're different. Hey, I forgot that it was heated, so I put a little triangle up there. Sorry about that. But it is going to produce solid sodium bromide, and again the sodium is +1 and the bromine's -1, so the charges cancel out perfectly for the sodium ion and the bromide ion. So that's how you take chemical equation and turn it into a sentence just by deciphering all the little symbols, and you can take the sentence and turn it into the symbols. So you have symbols into sentences and sentences into symbols, and that's the first quiz. So I'm going to stop the lecture here because that covers part 1, and then we'll do part 2, which is over balancing chemical equations next.